So by the way, what's the main point of the paper is, well, how do we explain Neanderthals? Well, Neanderthals have genetic sequences that are different than modern humans. Well, how did they become different? Well, after the flood, during the flood, there was great global volcanism, right? Tectonics, heat, radiation release. Have you heard of the heat problem? It's like, yeah, it's actually more of a problem than it is something you probably don't really want to admit is an issue with the flood. But after the flood, the immediate post-flood world, you notice repetition, immediate post-flood world, unstable crust, radiation-rich rocks, caves with chemical deposits. There's caves around today. Neanderthals then what? Well, their small human groups migrated into these regions and lived in these caves. The thing is, modern humans also lived in caves, and they don't have the same, in this case, accelerated mutation rates. All right, because that's what they're going to try to argue, is that Neanderthals are different than modern humans because they accumulated mutations at a faster pace because of these environments they lived in. But modern humans also lived across all the different locations that Neanderthals existed. We know they coexisted for quite a period of time. So just right there on the face of it, this argument just doesn't really work.
This is my rebuttal to good old Dr. Joel Duff, theistic evolutionist. Therefore, he believes that God would have guided the evolutionary process from pond scum to people, from goo to you, from fish to fishermen, from bacteria-like organisms to biologists. He believes that what is consistent with the Bible, the idea that banana plants and whales are related through common ancestry, that is a theory that it's not even a good idea. That does not belong in a book, especially the Bible, perfectly good book that has never been disproven or refuted by critics. Let's not try and force fit the idea of common descent in there. Anyways, he made some comments in a recent video, and we are hitting every single challenge and criticism. Neanderthals, caves, and radiation rocks. And so I've got several articles that I cite directly in this response. And so you can stay up to date on what we are saying on Neanderthals. But essentially, Neanderthals would have come about sometime after the flood. We understand that they were 40% less fit than modern humans. They were isolated, inbred. They were adapted in many ways. They have a lot of robust features. Those kinds of that phenotypic diversity, the robustness would have been present in the pre-flood world, would have been present in Noah and his family, and it would have become prominent or manifested largely after the flood. But they're a mix. They're robust Neanderthals, muscular, heavy, superior to us in many ways, but also genetically compromised. Because after the flood, the people group that led to what we know about Neanderthals today, they would have become isolated, inbred. They existed in small tribes, small populations. They would have existed around areas that had radiation rocks, because the flood, the global flood, would have comprised what? A lot of heat, energy, radiation. And so a lot of the caves that you find so-called hominins like Neanderthals being associated with or living in, combined with nearby rocks, combined with their isolation, the fact that they were inbred, you'd have rapid rates of fixation, rapid mutation accumulation. You'd have these deleterious mutations coming to the forefront that are in recessive form. They'd lead to more genetic damage. And these Neanderthals genetically would shift. They would change from the genetics of extant modern humans, which is why they're different from us. But they also have a lot more DNA differences, a lot more mutations in their mitochondrial genome, in their mitochondrial chromosome. But because they were subjected to radiation rocks, which is my hypothesis, that radiation, those negative conditions, the lack of vitamin D, drinking from contaminated water, toxic water, living in toxic caves or nearby toxic caves, comprising chemicals, harsh chemicals, would have sped up their mutation rate. And I document in my studies that even today, we have real-time evidence of families due to harmful external environmental factors, okay, including chemotherapy was one of the studies, These were drivers of hypermutation. They would also destroy DNA repair enzymes, which means more mutations are going to get passed on to the next generation. And so there are some families that had 7 to 10 times more mutations being passed on. That's wild. Well, very easy to explain Neanderthal genomes. They had more mutations for these many reasons. A lot of reasons associated with the environment, radiation rocks. Anyways, Joel Duff made some comments and criticisms of that. And so I just published this piece this morning debunking Joel Duff. So let's have a look. Why Duff's critique misses the mark. Were modern humans really living all in the same regions? Basically, in a nutshell, he was saying, well, modern humans coexisted with Neanderthals and they lived in a lot of the same regions as Neanderthals, and they may have even lived in a lot of the same caves as Neanderthals, and they're not hypermutating, and we don't have evidence for hypermutation in us, extant humans, and so on and so forth. It doesn't work. He barely tried. Very disappointing. But these critics that we've been debunking lately, as I like to say, these are early Christmas gifts. They are gifts to creation science and to biblical creationists, because the biblical creation model keeps getting stronger and stronger as we refine our position and our arguments in light of what critics are saying. A lot of it's just confirmation bias at this point from the critics, okay, because only their audience that are just so heavily invested in this false idea that humans are related to banana plants, they're the only ones that are going to think these critics are doing a good job refuting us. Were modern humans really living in the same regions? We don't have a complete map of where Neanderthals lived. Fossil and genetic evidence is patchy. To assume exact overlap, Joel Duff is overstating his case, basically, acting as if he knows all the details of Neanderthals to make his assertion. Even if overlap existed, populations would not have been equally exposed in the same caves, environments, or stressors. There would be variation in that. Not all populations were equally vulnerable. As I said, Neanderthals were different than modern humans. Neanderthals were isolated, heavily inbred, genetically compromised, 40% less fit than modern humans. Plenty of evidence for this. Modern humans were not in the same demographic condition. Thus, the same exposure would not produce the same outcomes, Joel. You got to engage these points, Joel. I'm expecting more from you. Environmental conditions have changed since the flood, right? It's not going to be exactly the same as it was after the flood and then today, okay? There's been some changes that have taken place in these caves in terms of radiation levels, the rock, so on and so forth. The environment, the cold ecoglacial environment that Neanderthals lived and were associated with. Rocks, radiation levels, and chemical environments were not static. Flood-related effects, heat, pressure, radiation release, may have produced conditions unique to the early post-flood world. Caves today may not reflect what Neanderthals experienced. Fitness matters. Neanderthals were less fit. Just one second, just texting a friend here. Hope everybody enjoyed tonight's debate as much as I did. We got plenty more to look forward to on the nature of God. Okay, so let's continue here. Guys, it's a lot of fun refuting these critics. They're making it too easy. Neanderthals were less fit overall, carrying more harmful variants and deletions. We know this from their genetics. Even with the same exposure, they were more prone to hypermutation. This is why I argue Neanderthals were exactly the kind of population expected to hypermutate. If you are looking for the perfect recipe for a hypermutating population, Dr. Joel Duff, Neanderthals would fit that perfect recipe. Okay? Isolated, existing in cold ecoglacial environments. They were in conditions where they lacked certain essential vitamins like vitamin D. They were isolated, inbred. They existed in areas on the planet that could have been associated with increased radiation levels, the negative consequences of being in or near certain caves, okay? And the rapid rate of fixation in their small, isolated, inbred populations, those deleterious mutations would be coming to the forefront real quick. Their genetics would be shifting quite a bit in the short amount of time that they lived on the planet. Then modern humans came, they interbred, we have their genetics. Neanderthals are clearly made in the image of God. They're a sophisticated people group. I still can't believe certain creationist groups, old earth creationist groups like Reasons to Believe, try to argue that they're just animals, beasts, not really human. Neanderthals were a sophisticated people group. They buried their dead. They had evidence for spirituality. They sailed in the open seas and went fishing for tuna. Purposeful navigation. They made instruments. They made tools. Again, they're a sophisticated, intelligent people group and more robust and well built than us in many ways. But unfortunately, the conditions that they were associated with meant that they would be in a genetically compromised state. Okay. But then modern humans came in, extant humans. Today would be humans. We're extant humans, but anatomically modern looking humans would have come in, and Neanderthals would have assimilated with them in many ways. We don't have complete histories. We know the exact lifestyle, diet, and exposures of every Neanderthal group. Of course not. To dismiss, so the question is, do we know the exact lifestyle, diet, and exposures of every Neanderthal group? To dismiss the radiation rock hypothesis by saying modern humans were there too oversimplifies a complex picture and assumes far more than the data supports. Dr. Duff wants to make my model collapse under the weight of this question, but in reality, it underscores the importance of model building. It's the creationists doing the model building these days, if that isn't obvious yet. The biblical framework explains why Neanderthals look degraded and mutation heavy. There's no challenge with the number of mutations they have, guys. We've explained it. And our explanation has resulted in a great model in explaining Neanderthal genomes and Neanderthal phenotypes. So here's an important point. You have inbred versus diverse. Okay. You have inbred Neanderthals, isolated and inbred. So you're going to have a variation, differences in the way mutations accumulate versus humans, which are diverse. These are points that the critics need to consider. Different vulnerabilities, lower baseline fitness versus higher. Different environments. Again, unique cave and geological pressures versus broader dispersal. Now, I want the reader to make sure that they check out the appendix. This is where you'll find a lot of the more technical notes on Neanderthal hypermutation and cave environments. Notice this. This is some great information here, guys. Utilize it. Critics like Dr. Joel Duff argue that if cave environments accelerated Neanderthal mutation rates, modern humans who also lived in caves should show the same pattern. This is his argument. This objection oversimplifies the science. Cave exposure varies dramatically. Radon levels in caves differ by orders of magnitude depending on local geology, ventilation, and hydrology. Neanderthals, different demographically, okay? There's differences here. Neanderthal genomes reveal extensive inbreeding, small effective population sizes, and reduced fitness. Modern human populations were larger, more interconnected, and genetically healthier. Small fragmented groups accelerate drift and fixation, which amplifies divergence. So no wonder why they've diverged from us genetically, and we see those differences today. But then your critics of biblical creation and biblical origins, they say, well, that means Neanderthals are basically a sister species. You can't explain their genetics in just 4,500 years. You can't explain them in the young Earth model. They could not have descended from Adam and Eve. All of that has been debunked. And another point too, do we have multi-generational studies? Do we have a good, solid mutation rate for Neanderthals? We have their DNA, but we have enough data, enough DNA? Do we know, okay, well, like for example, pedigrees, mitochondrial DNA, that is maternally inherited, uniparentally inherited DNA, the mitochondrial chromosome. It's a smaller chromosome, about 16,500 letters. It exists outside of the nucleus. Okay. You have these little mitochondria. We know they're the power plants of the cell, basically, as you've heard. They're involved in energy production, producing ATP, for example. Anyways, it's a smaller chromosome. Now, if you wanted to get a pedigree rate, if you wanted to get a mutation rate, which we have good mutation rates, I use a more conservative number, about 0.1 per generation. Well, you'd have to get grandmothers, mothers, daughters. Count up the differences, you'll find that it's quite fast, okay? Multi-generational studies are best. But anyways, do we have that for Neanderthals? Hypermutation signatures are best detected in pedigree or multi-generation data sets. For Neanderthals, we only have fossil DNA, which is degraded and heavily filtered by ancient DNA pipelines. Filtering systematically removes irregular calls, the very anomalies that could reveal bursts. This creates an artificial clock-like appearance. I've discussed this in my follow-up article on Neanderthals. This can be read here. So here's an important point, perhaps one of the most important points for someone like Dr. Joel Duff to understand and then try again. The hypermutation model never relies on caves alone. Neanderthals faced a synergy of stressors. It's not just one stressor, it's a synergy of stressors. Environmental, radon, volcanic fallout, cave-borne chemicals, limited sunlight, vitamin D deficiency, drinking toxic water, demographic, severe inbreeding, isolation, and very small effective population sizes. Their genomes, 40% lower fitness compared to modern humans, high deleterious allele load, deletions and signs of what? Genomic degradation. So here's the thing. Take all these together in combination. All these stressors plausibly elevate mutation rates and fixation dynamics beyond modern baseline. This is not an extrapolation fallacy. Okay. Evolutionists want to look at the varieties today of, let's say, dogs. We have hundreds of dog breeds, domestic dogs. We have a lot of similarities. We see adaptations, and they want to extrapolate that to mean that dogs, cats, and banana plants are related through common ancestry. That's an extrapolation fallacy, an unwarranted, illogical extrapolation. But in light of everything we know about Neanderthals and the conditions they lived in and were associated with, one can easily extrapolate that to mean that they were hypermutating. It's not a very difficult conclusion. Expecting to see clear mutation, hypermutation signatures in Neanderthal genomes ignores methodological limits and averaging effects. Recombination smooths variation. Drift spreads mutations population-wide, producing consistency, not irregularity. Filtering erases anomalies. In short, the absence of visible bursts is expected under current data constraints. Demanding a pedigree signal from fossil DNA is not scientific rigor, it's special pleading.